It started with a letter slipped under my door, a formal notice from the HOA claiming my family farm was violating community standards. They said my barn was an eyesore, my land was non-compliant, and my heirloom structures didn't reflect the neighborhood's aesthetic. What they didn't know was that this farm had been in my family for over a century, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it away. This is the story of how my peaceful heirloom farm turned into a battlefield against the HOA's greed and control. If you love seeing HOA bullies get exactly what they deserve, stick around. This story will make your jaw drop. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable real-life HOA stories. It helps us tell more stories just like this one, stories where ordinary people stand up against corruption and win. Let's get into it. It all began one misty morning in early spring. The air smelled of tilled soil, the fields stretched endlessly, and the old red barn, built by my great-grandfather in 1919, still stood proudly in the middle of the property. It was a place full of memories, harvests, family gatherings, laughter, and history embedded in every beam. But lately the town had changed. Developers moved in, turning farmland into manicured subdivisions. What was once open country was now swallowed by freshly paved streets and sterile lawns. And with that came the HOA, a group of self-appointed enforcers who believed every property should look identical. My farm stood out, too real, too rustic, too alive. At first they sent letters, "Your property violates visual harmony." Then, fines started piling up for ridiculous reasons. An old tractor, visible from the road, a chicken coop, too close to the fence line. They even cited me for the color of my barn, claiming it wasn't in the approved palette. I ignored them, thinking they'd eventually realize this was farmland, not a suburban backyard. But I underestimated them. They weren't just trying to fine me, they wanted the land. Rumors began to spread that a luxury development company had its eye on my property. My land was the last piece standing in the way of their Riverside Estates project. That's when the HOA got aggressive. They held secret meetings, voted to condemn my structures for being unsafe, and sent inspectors who weren't even licensed. They took photos over the fence, measuring distances with drones. One morning, I found a bright orange notice nailed to my barn door. Final violation. Property subject to seizure. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about power and greed. But they picked the wrong person to bully. The next day, I began digging through old county records, deeds, and property laws. I discovered something they hadn't. My land predated the HOA itself by almost 70 years. Legally, they had no jurisdiction over my property boundaries. I contacted an attorney specializing in land preservation, and together we began building a defense. While they ramped up pressure with public complaints and community gossip, I quietly gathered evidence. Emails, meeting notes, and even recorded statements showed the HOA's president had personal ties to the development company. They wanted to drive me out so the company could acquire the land at a fraction of its value. As I watched my crops sway under the golden sunset that week, I made a silent vow. They would not destroy what generations of my family had built. The HOA was about to learn what happens when you challenge a legacy. By the time summer arrived, things escalated beyond anything I'd expected. The HOA filed an official claim to repossess my land through eminent domain, citing community redevelopment interest, but they didn't have that power. Only the county did. My lawyer sent a cease and desist, but the HOA ignored it. They began sending contractors onto my property for inspection purposes. I caught one man photographing my home while my dogs barked furiously. I recorded every incident. The next morning, I showed up at the HOA meeting, uninvited. The room fell silent. Their president, a smug man in his 50s named Ronald, tried to lecture me about community compliance. But I'd come prepared. I placed copies of the land deeds on the table, proving that my farm was established before the HOA's founding and therefore exempt from their regulations. The silence in that room was priceless. Ronald's face turned pale, but he recovered quickly, claiming further legal review was needed. That was code for, "We're not done yet." Within weeks, I received notice that they'd filed a nuisance complaint with the county, trying to bypass me altogether. They claimed my barn was structurally hazardous and my land unfit for use. They wanted an official order for demolition. I knew then that playing defense wasn't enough. I had to expose them. So I went public. I contacted local news, shared my story, and opened my farm for community visits. Families came, children played, and people saw firsthand the heritage they were trying to erase. The story went viral on social media. HOA tries to seize 100-year-old family farm. Support poured in from across the state. Even the county board took notice. During the next hearing, the board ruled that my farm was officially protected under the Historical Land Preservation Act. That meant the HOA couldn't touch it. I thought that would end it, but Ronald wasn't done. He called an emergency HOA meeting and tried to pass a motion declaring the farm public safety risk. It was desperate, pathetic, but dangerous. Because buried in their charter was a clause allowing them to petition law enforcement for emergency action. 2 nights later, floodlights beamed across my fields. Trucks rolled in. Contractors and security guards showed up to enforce removal of unsafe structures. They were trying to tear down my barn. But I wasn't alone. Word spread fast, and neighbors showed up, dozens of them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the trucks, recording everything. When the sheriff arrived, I showed him the preservation order, stamped and signed. Ronald screamed that I was endangering the community, but it was over. The sheriff ordered them off my property. The next morning, the HOA received notice from the county. Any further harassment would result in criminal charges for trespassing and unlawful interference. My family farm was safe, but I didn't stop there. I filed a civil lawsuit against Ronald and the HOA board for defamation, harassment, and property invasion. Months later, we settled, and the HOA was forced to pay damages. Ronald resigned in disgrace. The development company backed out, citing negative publicity. The barn still stands today, painted the same deep red it's always been. Every morning when I walk across the fields, I remember that letter, that first attempt to erase a century of family history. They thought they could bully me out with fines and threats. Instead, they awakened generations of stubbornness. My heirloom farm remains not just a piece of land, but a symbol that not everything can be bought or controlled. And now, whenever I see HOA signs around town, I smile, because I know they'll think twice before trying to mess with a farmer again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story of standing up to HOA corruption, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who'd love to see justice served. More unbelievable real-life HOA stories are coming soon, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next one.